So Treasury and Bank of England could make two changes that would really help us set up regional mutual banks. And the first of them is to allow regional banks to collaborate with each other to become more efficient and to share knowledge and costs, because that's the best way that you can combine the best of local with the best of national. So, local banks, but can become more efficient and cost effective by working together. But at the moment, that's not really possible under competition law and other regulations in this country. So that's the first change that they could make, would be to facilitate that. And the second really is any assistance to help local authorities who are very interested in investing in these sorts of banks, because they align so well with the strategies of local authorities to improve the economy of their local areas and to transition to a low carbon economy and to be inclusive. That helping local authorities to be able to invest in regional mutual banks would be extremely helpful. I say a lot of them are very interested, but there are sort of certain barriers and obstacles that they face in doing so. So there are definitely positive steps that the regulators and the government could take that would speed our progress.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting question, and I'm not sure I've been asked it before. And I think in many ways, of course, they're the same. I mean, the principles and the values that you're trying to apply in what the impact of banking is on society and the environment are the same, but the scale is, of course, different. So, I mean, one of the things you need to be very careful of when investing in a national or global bank is the impact it might be having in other countries in the world, and supply chains in poorer countries, and whether there's exploitation in those supply chains. And also larger banks tend to be the ones that are investing in large-scale fossil fuel projects and other very destructive forms of economic activity. Now, a local bank, sort of by its nature, isn't going to be financing oil rigs. But instead, different things, I suppose, come into play in that the disadvantage of trying to be a local ethical finance provider, I suppose, is that smaller businesses they don't have the resources to have very sophisticated and complicated ways of measuring their own impact on the world. So in the way that large banks can sort of require companies to give them lots of information about their carbon emissions, say, or what their environmental impacts are, it's not very reasonable, really, for a smaller business to be asked by their bank to collect such sort of complicated data about what is a potentially quite a small and simple business. So we have to approach it rather differently, I think, in having, and this is where the benefits of being small and local come into play, because you know the customer, you have a relationship with the customer, you're able to make better judgments, close up and personal, as it were, about the management and how they want to run that business and how ethical they are and what the impacts of that business are, but without relying on huge data sort of sets and bureaucratic processes. So, and that was quite a long-winded answer, but I suppose that in a nutshell is you need to make ethical finance appropriate to the scale that you're operating at. And for us, that means that we want to work with our business community to help them improve their environmental and social impacts, certainly rather than making them jump through hoops on reporting what their impacts already are.
Sure. Yeah. So approaching it with the intention to be as accessible as possible, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Cool. And our final question seems to come out of some fantastic Twitter activity that we've had recently, which is sort of related to where we are in the pandemic and also related to the general trend that we've seen across the UK and elsewhere, which is about cash, like use of physical money.
Yes, the question of cash, very interesting one.
Ongoing.
I mean, our position on cash has always been that we're not pro-cash or anti-digital. What we are is pro-choice. We want our members to be able to decide how they want to organise their finances.
Mm.
And because many people still want to or need to, they rely on cash, and particularly in rural areas, as you've said, it's important to our mission as a mutual bank to support them in having access to, to cash banking facilities. So the problem is that there comes a point where if so few people are using cash, the infrastructure becomes very difficult to maintain. So I think that our strategy was always going to be to try and work very closely with the post office, as well as having our own branch network where people could go to sort of bank to pay in cash and to withdraw it. And we'll still do that. But I think there's now, hopefully, this has sort of prompted the government even more to think about how, preparing for a future that perhaps doesn't have cash. Because if we are going to move towards that future, what's really vital is that everybody, and I mean, 100% of the population can have access for free to a digital alternative to banknotes.
Yeah.
And the Bank of England did release a consultation paper about this, about a digital cash. And, once that would be in place, we'd feel comfortable about banks no longer supporting cash. But we've been very dismayed by how the large banks have made it increasingly difficult for businesses and people to use cash because it suits their profitability, whereas we want to be led by members and customers and what they want, and we'll continue to be so.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I know in my experience living in the Southwest, there are communities, there are certain industries that really continue to use cash. So it's really great to get your opinion on that. Cool.
Well, I think there's one other thing that's worth mentioning is that, one of the criticisms of banknotes has always been that they are a way of transmitting, viruses, bacteria, and that's true. But, last time somebody pointed this out to me as a reason for getting rid of cash, and this was in London. I said, "How did you get here today?" And they said, "Oh, I came on the tube." I said, "Well, did you touch anything? Because I can guarantee you whatever you touched has all the same stuff on it." So I think there's a little bit of alarmism about banknotes and coins being sort of dirty. And I think that's being partly spread about by people who want to get rid of cash,
Right.
to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's no more of an issue than the post that you get through your mailbox, or the packaging of the groceries you've just picked up from the supermarket. So I think we should sort of retain a bit of perspective on whether COVID-19 should mean the end of cash. I don't think it should mean the end of cash any more than it means the end of the postal system or groceries.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Tony. Really appreciate your time answering those questions for us.
Pleasure. Great speaking to you, Bex. Thank you.